The useEffect hook is one of the more commonly used hooks in React and is absolutely important for you to learn them if you want to be a good React developer. So let's just get right into it. What is the useEffect hook? Well, the useEffect hook is a hook that listens for changes. That's really all you have to know about it. It's just a listener. And if something changed, and I'll show you exactly what this thing is, but if something changed, then what it does is it executes a block of code. For example, let's say we have a variable that says blue, and if we were to change that variable, we can hook up a useEffect hook to listen to that variable. If we were to change it to pink, we can go ahead and execute some code because it was listening to it and it saw that it changed, and then it went ahead and again executed some code. So let's just get right into it. So this is the application that we are going to be building with our useEffect hook. So over here, let me just quickly refresh. You can see that there's nothing that appears, and then it appears kind of in this like creepy way, and it's like pick a box. So you're like, okay, what's gonna happen here? I'm really nervous. But at the end of the day, it just shows you a picture of a cute animal. So box 1 shows you a bunch of foxes, box 2 shows you a bunch of cats, and then box 3 shows you dogs. And you can, of course, click back. Now, if you were to click on box 1 again, you wouldn't change the fox over here because you already clicked on it. But if you were to click on box 2, that would change. Click back, you would see a different animal. So this is what we're going to be building, and we're going to be primarily using the useEffect hook. We also will be using the useState hook. So if you're not comfortable with that, then just skip to the part of the lecture where I talk about the useState hook, because that's also going to be used here. Honestly, those two are these two hooks, the useEffect hook and the useState hook, are probably going to be used in all of the hooks section because they're just so commonly used. All right, but before we build this, let's just go ahead and let's just go open up our application. So I have my application running on localhost 3002. And what I did was I created this component over here, a functional based component. So I called this component with useEffect, and you can see this is the functional based component right over here. I really haven't done anything. Let me just zoom in a little bit so everybody can see. Yeah, and that's really all I did. Nothing crazy. And also in the app.css, I have these stylings right over here. So you can go ahead and just copy these stylings. What I'll do is I'll actually say that these are the useEffect stylings. So I can say useEffect, because I'm probably gonna have different stylings for different hooks. And if you just want to copy the useEffect styling, then there they are. So that's the useEffect styling. I just go to my GitHub page. I'll have the link in the description below, and just go to the app.css and just copy and paste these styles. All right, so terrific. Now let's just get right into it. So what I want to do is, before we actually go ahead and build this relatively, and it's not really complicated, but this bigger application, let's just get more comfortable with the useEffect hook. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to import the useEffect hook, and we can do that from React. So we can say, we can import, oh my goodness, what is going on here? useEffect from React. And now what we can do is, let's also import the useState hook. And I'm assuming you guys know what the useState hook is doing. What we're gonna simply do is gonna create a very simple counter. So we're gonna say count, and then set count. We're gonna say useState, and over here we're just going to have an h1, and that's just going to render that count. Very simple, nothing insane. If I were to refresh, you can see that over here. And now what I want to do is I also want to create a button that of course would set the count to whatever the existing count is plus 1. So let's just say over here add. And we're not even going to bother with the subtract. We're just going to set an on click. This is going to be an arrow function. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the count to the count plus 1. Very simple. So now you can see that our state is continuously updating. You guys should probably know this. So, okay, so that's cool. But now what we want to do is we want to use the useEffect. And remember, I said that the useEffect is a listener. So what it does is it listens to changes. So what we can do is we can set up this listener by saying useEffect and then invoke it. Now, I said that it's a listener, and what it also does is it emits code if something changes. So what we can do is we can pass in a arrow function, and then over here we can have the code that we want it to execute if anything were to change. So over here, let's just very simply say console.log something changed. So it's giving us an alert, console.log something changed. And I think actually console.alert is a thing, so maybe I can use that instead. Just to actually no, console.alert is not a thing. So let's just do log. There we go. Okay, so let's go inspect our console. And to do that, just right click on your screen, go to console. And you can see here, and let me just zoom into the console a little bit. You can see that we have something changed. So something changed. And let's make it a little bit more angry. So let's refresh again. And you can see right away, it said that something has, where is this? Something changed right here. So very angry at us, something changed. Now, if I were to change this, so notice that there's nothing below here, but if I were to change this and just say add, I get another something changed. Add another something changed. Add another. So it's continuously listening if anything has changed. Now what we can also do is we can set another count, and we can say count 2, for instance. And then we can also have another button that is in charge of changing that count. So we can say add 2. So over here we add 2 to count, or add 2 to count 2, and we set count 2. It's kind of weird. But now what we can do is, and of course we also have to render that. So let's go here, let's render that appropriately, count 2. So now what we can do is, okay, something changed here, and so we're seeing that console, but also something changed here, so we're also seeing that console. So again, this is going to emit some code if something changed. It's a listener. It listens for changes, and it emits code if something changed. Now, the way that I did it is probably not the best way, and this is probably not the way that we are going to be using it. So the reason why is because this is going to emit some code and execute some code regardless of what changed. Anything can change, but it's still going to emit this exact same code. What if we don't want to execute the code if count 2 has changed, but we only want to execute the code if there's just one count over here changed, so this variable changed. So that is more likely what we are going to be doing. And sometimes we also want to execute different pieces of code. Maybe we want to execute a different piece of code than this one if one of the other ones changed. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we do that by adding another parameter inside of the useEffect hook, and that is going to be an array. And essentially inside of this array, we can provide all of the values that we want to listen to. So over here, we can say count. And we can say over here that this useEffect will only listen to the count. So let's just go about doing this right now. Let's quickly refresh. Initially, the first useEffect hooks will always run in the beginning. So you can see that over here we have something changed. And now if I were to add one, something changed, something changed, something changed, something changed, something changed. But if I were to add 2, I don't see it. And now what I can also do is I can use another useEffect in conjunction. And this useEffect can, let's say, something else changed. And over here I can have an array, and I can say, I want this useEffect to listen to count 2. So now if I were to say something changed, and then over here something else changed. So you can see that. And that really is how you use useEffects. And what you can also do, of course, is you can also append another variable. So now it's listening to both of these variables over here and executing this line of code. So that's something that you can also do. So now if I were to refresh this and execute this, or press this button, then it should execute this console and as well as this console. So you can see here that we get something changed and something else changed. So yeah, so that's pretty much really all we have to know with the useEffect. But now let's kind of use it in a more practical example by building this crazy application and getting our... Sometimes it takes a while for these API calls. There we go. You get this wacky cat. I actually love these pictures. The the cat pictures always kill me. The dog ones are pretty funny too. But I don't know. I'm a cat person. Hopefully that doesn't get rid of any of my subscribers. Hope not. I'm not a fox person. I never really owned a fox. These guys are wild animals. Okay, enough of me looking at cats. One more cat. There we go. Okay, this is just beautiful. All right, so let's just go about and let's create our application. So let's just strip everything down. Let's get rid of all this. All we're gonna do is we're gonna keep the useEffect hook. We're gonna get rid of that console. And so we want to build this. So remember, we want to build this. Now, one thing that I want to note is that when you refresh, initially it doesn't render. It has this kind of like creepy pop-up effect. So we're gonna have to build this as well. So let's actually begin with that. So let's build out these components, and then let's begin with this. And there's actually a very neat way that we can use useEffect to create this feature. So the first thing that we need to do is just build out the components. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because, again, this is a crash course on just useEffect, not on HTML. So I'm going to create a h1. I'm going to give it a class name of scary text. And remember, if you don't have the class names, just go to my GitHub in the description and then copy these styles over here. And they're going to be wrapped around the useEffect styles, or you can copy them all. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so we got this scary text. We're going to say here, pick a box. And then over here, we're also going to have, a div. And in here, we're going to have this is going to be our container that's going to contain all of the boxes. So we're going to say class name box container. And then in here, we're just going to have our boxes. And we're going to identify the boxes by ID. So let's just give each box an ID. So we're going to give it, this one's going to be an ID of 1. And we're going to give it a class name of box. Very, very simple. And we're going to give it an initial text. And this text is going to be an H2. And it's going to be box, or 1 in there. So now what we can do is we can just save this or copy this and just paste it a few times. And then just change the number from 1 to 2, and then from here 1 to 3. So now what we can see is, now I don't even know which one's the demo and which one's the real one. I think this one's the real one. Okay, cool. So now you should get this over here. But what we want to do is we want to, when we refresh, immediately as soon as we open the page, we get this like creepy effect. You know, it just shows up right away. So how do we do that? Right now, of course, it doesn't do that. It just renders right away. So how can we do that? Well, let's actually create a state. So if you think about this, over here, right now the state of our application is it's not showing. So currently it's not showing. And then now the state of our application is that it is showing. And this is why it's really important to know useState if you want to know any of the other hooks. It's really important. That's kind of the base hook to know. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do const, and we're going to call this show statement. We're going to say here show or set show statement. And over here, we're going to say that this is a useEffect. And initially, we're going to make this false because we don't want to show the statement. Now what we can do is conditionally render this stuff over here. So what we can do is we can get this over here. And we can put in the curly braces. This is kind of basic React. And we can say, okay, if show statement is true, then what I want you to do is render those two components. Now those are two components that are kind of sibling level, so we need to append a fragment in there. And so what happens now is we don't see it. So we don't see it. So now what we can do if we want is to maybe use a use timeout. So what we can say over here, and let's just do that in line 7. We can basically say, okay, so maybe we can say set time out. So this is the function that runs after a certain period of time. So over here, this is the function, and then over here is the code that you want to execute. And then as a second parameter, you can provide the period of time that you want it to wait before it actually runs. So you can see here that this is the set timeout. And over here, what we can do is we can say set show statement to true. Okay, so now if we were to execute this, it works, but huge problem. and I'll show you this problem right now. Let's just add that counter back. So let's just add a state where we have a counter. Maybe we have another piece of state, and then over here we have set counter and initially use state, and then we're gonna have 0. And we're just going to append that counter somewhere. We're going to have a button in here. And what this button is going to do is add, and we've kind of done this before. I just want to quickly illustrate the issue that is happening here. So now what we can do is we can just say set counter to, I don't know, counter +1. Okay, so now what if, and let's actually display that counter. So the counter, and then we're going to save this. You can see here we get the counter. So now what if I want to add the counter? Then you can see that the use timeout is, the problem with this is that the use timeout will always be rendering. So let me just show you this. Now it doesn't seem like a big problem because it's just setting the show rate to true. But what if, I don't know, we had something that did very complicated logic. So let me just show here, set time out. And let me go here and then show you the console. And so you can see every single time, you can see here that the set timeout, let me just refresh. So you can see if we were to run this, what the fuck? Yeah, there we go. It's like continuously rendering. It's continuously rendering. I'm sorry, there was kind of a delay there and I was just a little confused. So there we go. It's continuously rendering, and that could be problematic. What we want is we want this to just render once, and no matter what change, we don't want to execute this function again. So how do we go about doing this? Well, to do this, what we can do is we can actually wrap this in a useEffect. So we can say useEffect. If I can just get the capitalization right, there we go, useEffect. And then what we can do is we can wrap it in a useEffect. Now you might be thinking, well, this useEffect is going to be executed every single time we make a change. So if I were to go to the console here, and then make a change, I don't know why there's like a delay, but it does eventually appear. Now what we can do instead is provide an empty array. Now when providing an empty array, what we're saying here is we just want this to execute one time, and then we don't want it to execute ever. So this is kind of similar to the component did mount. So as soon as the component mounts, we're going to execute some code, and then that's it. So as soon as the component mounts, again, we're going to execute some code. So now what we can do is we can refresh this. Again, let's go ahead and inspect. And then we're going to go ahead and console, and then if we were to scroll up, you can see here set timeout. Only, let me just refresh actually. Let me show you. So the set timeout should have consoled. There we go. Set timeout has consoled. And now if I were to make that change, it doesn't console anymore. So it consoles just once. So if you ever want to execute code as soon as that component mounts and you only want to execute that code just once, then just provide an empty array in here. Okay, cool. So we basically finished this part. Let me just get rid of this extra stuff over here. And we can get rid of this over here as well, because we don't need that anymore. And now you can see here, we get this super duper creepy effect. Awesome. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to, when we press on a button, we want to get these animals. Now, for these animals, what we're doing is we're actually making an API request. So this is a AJAX request that we're making to an API, and it's getting us an image of a random fox, or over here in this case a random cat, or in this case a random dog. So that's what we are doing. And so what we want to do is we want to, okay, depending on whatever box that we clicked on, then we want to fetch that image and then render that image. So, okay, what does this look like over here? So clicking on a box, what does that look like? Well, right there, that is a piece of state. So we need to, again, store this piece of information somewhere. So we need to know exactly what box that we have clicked on. So what we can do is we can say const, and we can say box picked. So this is the box that we picked. And we can also say set box picked. And this could be equal to useState. And initially what we can do is we can set this to 0. Because right now you can see we have an ID of 1, 2, and 3. And these are the IDs of the boxes. And we're going to, if somebody clicks on box 1, we're going to change this to 1. But right now we haven't clicked on any box, so we're just going to leave it as 0. Terrific. And so now what we want to do is we want to change the state of the box that we picked once we clicked on these particular boxes. So what we can do is we can just have an on click, and we can say here set box clicked to the e.target.id. And what we can do is, remember, we have an ID. We can get that from the event.target.id. We have to, of course, pass the event in here. And now what we can do over here is just parse into this, because it's going to give us what am I saying here? It's going to give us a string. That what we want to do is we want to parse it to an integer. Okay, so cool. So that is terrific. So let's just save that. I got this cool auto format. Now what we're doing is we're changing our state every single time. All right, terrific. So this is cool. And let's just test out that this works. So let's just do console.log box picked. And then again, inspect. We can just go here. 1, 2. 2 is not a number. What's going on here? ID, parse int. This is kind of strange. I'm not really sure why that's happening. Oh, okay. I'm really not sure why that happened, to be honest. So let's just see why that is. Seems like sometimes it's getting us not a number. I'm sure there's probably like a little bug inside of this. That's fine. I think most of the time it's like right now it gives us not a number. But I think that's okay. I'm honestly okay with that. So let's just leave it as is. Because I really don't care about that little bug. It works most of the time. Okay, cool. So now that we changed the state of the box that we picked, what we want to do is we want to make an API request. And we want to make the API request depending on whatever box that we picked. For example, if we picked box 1, we want to make an API request to the Fox API. If we picked box 2, we want to make an API request to the cat API. And if we want to make, if we picked box 3, then we want to make a different request. And so, you know, what makes sense is we probably need a useEffect, because we need to execute a block of code, which is going to be the request every single time that we change the box picked. All right, so let's just go about doing that request right now. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to say, okay, if the box that was picked is equal to 1 or equal to 0, then we want to do nothing. So we just want to set the image URL that eventually we get back. So all these APIs that we're going to use, they're going to use they're going to send us back image URLs. And actually what we can do here is we can use another piece of state, and we can say here image, and over here set image. And then what we can do is we can say use state, and that is an empty array. So it's empty array in the beginning, and if the box that is picked is equal to that, then what we can do is we can say, hey, set it back to empty. All right, terrific. Now else, if it is something else, if it's 1, 2, or 3, then what we want to do is we want to fetch the image. Now the thing is, if we want to fetch the image, we're going to have to use AJAX request. And to do that, I like to use async await, so I can deal with my promises in a lot more easy fashion. Now the thing is you absolutely need to have async on the top function to use await. Now you might be thinking, okay, we can just append async here. That doesn't work. It's going to trigger an error. It doesn't work. Promise me. I promise you it does not work. So you can't have an async on this callback over here. So what I like to do instead is create a function, and this function is going to be called fetch image, and we can just mark this as an async function. So we can mark this as an async function. Over here, what we can say is we can say, okay, we can take the box ID. So we can take the box ID, and then we can say, okay, well, if the box ID triple equals 1, then what we want to do is we want to make an AJAX request. I personally like to use Axios for my AJAX requests. So I'm going to use that. So I'm going to import Axios from Axios. And so to do that, what you need to do is you need to actually install Axios. So just do npm install Axios into your React application, or yarn add Axios, depending on whatever you prefer. And so now what we can do is we can just do inside of here, we can make a request. So now we can say const response is equal to await, and we can await Axios. And this one's going to send us an image of the fox. So what we can say is we can say get, and I'm just going to go and just say this HTTPS. This is the API for the fox, and it's called randomfox.ca/FLOOF, and then over here question mark ref is equal to API list.fun. All right, cool. So now what we can do is once we get that response, we can actually set the image. So we can set the image to the image URL that this gets us back. So this is going to get us back an object, and then the image URL is going to be inside of the image key. So now what we can do is we can say response.data.image. All right, cool. And now what we can do over here is just fetch the image and just execute fetch the image. That's really all we have to do. So now what we can do is let's actually console.log that image just so we can see it in action. So we can actually, you know what? I got a better idea. Let's just render that image instead of console.logging it. So now what we can do here is we can say, okay, well, if our image exists, so if image exists, and if it's an empty array or empty string, then it actually doesn't exist. So it defaults to a falsy value. If it does, if there is a value in there, we can render the image URL, and over here we can provide a source of image. And then we can also say that the class name is equal to, we're going to say this animal image, just so that the image, we have proper sizing in there. So now, theoretically, if I were to click on this, it of course fails me, of course. Let's just see quickly why that is. So the reason that was failing, and hopefully you guys caught it, was because in line 20, when I'm calling the fetch image, I wasn't actually passing in the box ID. I was just doing this. And the fetch image, what it does is it requires the box ID, and then it conditionally fetches the image for different APIs. So it was never hitting this condition, and then thus it was never setting the image URL. So just pass that in. I'm sure you guys caught it. But yeah, that was what failed. And if you go back over here, you can see we get a lovely fox. If you were to refresh, creepy, and we get our fox. So now let's just do the same thing for the else if. So now we can say if the box ID is equal to 2, we can do something very similar, const response, and now we can say await, and then we can do axios dot get, and now we can get this specific URL. I'm just gonna paste it in here. This is the URL. You can either copy it, pause the video and just copy it, or you can just go to my GitHub page and just get it. And what this does is it returns a object, and the URL is stored in a key called file. So we can just say .file. And if you were to save this, you get a handsome fox. And if we were to click on this, you can see we get cats now. All right, so one thing that I want to note is remember that this useEffect hook is being called and called again. So I'm just gonna say here console.log fetching image. And this useEffect hook is only being called once the box picked has changed. So let me just quickly inspect here. And you can see now that the box picked is 2. If you were to re-click on this, the box picked will still be 2. And then if you click on it again, it's always going to be 2. So the useEffect is not going to be called at this point because the box picked has not changed. If I were to change it to 1 now, then you can see that it has been called. Now if I were to change this to 1 again, nothing happens. If I were to change this to 2, now you can see that it's called again and we get a different image. So remember, this it's a listener. It listens for something to change. If it does change, then it executes this. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. Let's just quickly get the last one for all you dog lovers in there. So let's just do else if box ID triple equals 3. Then what we want to do is we want to do a const response. We're gonna await this. We're gonna do an axios.get. Let's just copy this together. You and I, https://dog/ceo/api/breeds. Oh my goodness. Hopefully I don't make any mistake here. /random. And what this is gonna do is this is gonna give us a object where the image is actually stored in a key called message. I know it's kind of confusing, but that's how these docs are doing it. And now, what is this? Oh, okay. I was like, what is this random image? And then just this cat appears. Okay. I'm sorry, that was funny. Okay, we get this dog. I love cats. Okay. Okay, that's pretty much it, and that's useEffect. That's it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this part of the crash course.